Dennis O'Rourke.
Speaker, this government has made an unutterable mess of every aspect of housing policy in New Zealand, resulting in a dangerous price bubble for Auckland and excessive rent increases in the main centres and a continuation of poor quality rental houses. And that member's mouth is more like a letterbox, and he should close it. Mr Speaker, last year I read Shemabil Yaqub's book, Generation Rent, and I was impressed by the differences it described between New Zealand's rental market and legislation and those of other countries, developed countries, which have much better developed rental markets and much better legislation than we do. And there were three essential differences that it described. One was fair rents, and this government does need actually to pay attention to that, and there does need to be regulation to ensure that rents are fair, as is the case in other countries and as is not the case in New Zealand. When you look at the situation in both Auckland, where the severe housing crisis there has resulted in unaffordable rents for many people, and Christchurch, you get the same situation, mainly because of the long-term effects of the earthquakes there. In both of those situations, the market actually failed. Rents exploded, people were hurt, and this government did absolutely nothing whatsoever about it. And secondly, the other point the book made was that New Zealand does not have secure tenancies. And I'm coming to that, Mr Speaker, in the third point. But the second one is that New Zealand does not have secure tenancies. Our tenancies tend to be short-term with very little protection against eviction, and it's too easy to get rid of tenants in circumstances where they have nowhere else to go. And the third point is the one which this bill addresses, and that is the question of the quality of rental properties. And there are far too many damp old dumps in New Zealand which are being let to people on low incomes who cannot afford anything better. Some of those properties should actually be ineligible to rent altogether, and those who wish to continue to rent them need to bring them up to standard or just get out of the market. So the government again needs to do much more to improve the quality of rental properties so that people who can't afford to buy their own homes have a genuine alternative. And we are not seeing that as a result of government inaction. And its residential tenancies bill, which Dr Smith is so proud of, makes only some minor changes requiring smoke alarms and insulation, but does little else. And it actually still uses a 40-year-old insulation standard, which dates from 1978. And Mr Speaker, there were dozens of submissions on that bill imploring the government to apply much higher standards, especially what is regarded as the 2008 insulation standard, which is the one which would be adopted in this bill. And that's an important distinction between the government's very poor effort and this bill, which actually goes a hell of a lot further. And we're not seeing improvements in heating standards or insulation standards in New Zealand because the government hasn't done anything and because the government hasn't given any signals about that in its proposed legislation. In addition to all of that, we're not seeing improvements in weatherproofing and in damp and drafty homes, and all of that needs to be attended to as well. So, Mr Speaker, this bill makes a valuable contribution by requiring the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment to set minimum standards, and that's what's missing in current legislation, and it will have to do that within 5 years effectively. But, Mr Speaker, that may be too long, and New Zealand First will wish to question at the Select Committee whether that can be reduced to 3 years. We would also like to take a close look at Clause 6 to see whether that can be expanded to do other things, such as to require earthquake resistance, fire resistance, attention paid to minimum sizes of homes for families, single people and for couples and so on. And finally, Mr. Speaker, this bill is a good start. I believe it needs to go to the Select Committee so we can all have a good look at it, make the improvements that are needed and pass it, because that's what this country really needs.
Brett Hudson.